The graphic novel of To Kill a Mockingbird, and we are starting on page 90. All right, so Scout says, "You can just take that back, boy." So she's at school, and you can tell she's upset about something. And the boy says, "Ain't taking back a true fact. Your daddy defends." And Scout punches him right in the face. And now you can see she's home again, looking upset still. And Atticus says, "Scout, you're far too old and big for such childish things. What got into you?" Scout? And Scout says, "Do you defend black folks, Atticus?" And he says, "Of course I do." "Don't say that word, Scout. That's common." And Scout says, "It's what everyone at school says." Atticus says, "From now on it'll be everybody less one." And Scout says, "If you don't want me to grow up talking that way, why do you send me to school?" Scout says, "Do all lawyers defend black people, Atticus?" And he says, "Of course they do, Scout." "Then why did Cecil say that you defended black people? He made it sound like you were running a still." "I'm simply defending a black person. His name is Tom Robinson. He lives in that little settlement beyond the town dump. He's a member of Calpurnia's church, and Cal knows his family well. Scout, you aren't old enough to understand some things yet, but there's been some high talk around town to the effect that I shouldn't do much about defending this man." Scout says, "If you shouldn't be defending him, then why are you doing it?" Atticus says, "For a number of reasons. The main one is, if I didn't, I couldn't hold up my head in town." Atticus says, "I couldn't represent this county in the legislature. I couldn't even tell you or Jem not to do something again." Scout says, "If you mean you didn't defend that man, Jem and me wouldn't have to mind you anymore?" Atticus says, "That's about right. You might hear some ugly talk about it at school, but no matter what anybody says to you, don't you let 'em get your goat. Try fighting with your head for a change. It's a good one, even if it does resist learning." And Scout says, "Atticus, are we going to win it?" She's talking about the case there. Atticus says, "No, honey." And Scout says, "Then why?" Atticus interrupts her. "Simply because we were licked 100 years before we started is no reason for us to not try to win." Scout says, "You sound like Cousin Ike Finch." Cousin Ike Finch was Macomb County's sole surviving Confederate veteran. And Atticus says, "Come here, Scout." "It's different this time. This time we aren't fighting the Yankees. We're fighting our friends. But remember this, no matter how bitter things get, they're still our friends, and this is still our home." All right, so now Scout is back at school. "You gonna take that back, boy?" And Cecil says, "You gotta make me first. My folks said that your daddy was a disgrace, and that man ought to hang from the water tank." And Scout is fuming. Scout says, "It was the first time I ever walked away from a fight. Somehow, if I fought Cecil, I would let Atticus down. I felt extremely noble, and remained noble for 3 weeks." All right, now we're going to jump ahead to page 103. All right, so skipping ahead some time here, we're in 1935. Atticus was feeble. He was nearly 50. When Jem and I asked him why he was so old, he said he got started late. Jem was football crazy. Atticus was never too tired to play keep away, but when Jem wanted to tackle him, Atticus would say, "I'm too old for that, son." And you can see they're shooting cans right now. He did not do the things our schoolmates' fathers did. He never went hunting, he did not play poker, or fish, or drink, or smoke. He sat in the living room and read. It fell to Uncle Jack to instruct us in the rudiments of shooting our new air rifles. Atticus wasn't interested in guns. Uncle Jack says, "Not bad, eh, Atticus?" Atticus says, "I know in time you'll graduate to birds, son. Shoot all the blue jays you want if you can hit 'em, but remember, it's a sin to kill a mockingbird." That was the only time I ever heard Atticus say it was a sin to do something, and I asked Miss Maudie about it. Miss Maudie is one of their neighbors. Miss Maudie says, "Your father's right. Mockingbirds don't do one thing but make music for us to enjoy. They don't eat up people's gardens, don't nest in corn cribs, they don't do one thing but sing their hearts out for us. That's why it's a sin to kill a mockingbird." All right, jumping ahead again to page 127. All right, so the book is divided into two parts. We just read part 1, and this is going to be part 2. So we have a letter from Dill to Scout, and just some context that we skipped here. Dill and Scout have decided that they are going to get married when they're older. So, all right. Dear Scout, I hope that this letter finds you well. I have a new daddy whose picture you will find enclosed. He's a lawyer like Atticus. I will be staying here in Meridian this summer on account of we're going to build a fishing boat together. I'm awful sorry not to see you this summer, but just know that I love you, and don't worry, I will come and get you and marry you as soon as I have enough money. Yours very truly, Dill. The fact that I had a permanent fiancé was little compensation for his absence. I was crushed. Jem was 12. He was difficult to live with, inconsistent, moody. Atticus said I must be patient with him and disturb him as little as possible. After one altercation, when Jem hollered, "It's time you started being a girl and actin' right," I burst into tears and fled to Calpurnia. Don't you fret too much over Mr. Jem. Mr. Jem? Yeah, he's just about Mr. Jem now. He ain't that old. All he needs is somebody to beat him up, and I ain't big enough. As if this were not enough, the state legislature was called into emergency session, and Atticus left us for 2 weeks. How'd you and Mr. Jem like to come to church with me tomorrow? Really? How about it? It's like we're going to Mardi Gras. What's all this for, Cal? I don't want anybody saying I don't look after my children. First Purchase African M.E. Church was in the quarters outside the southern town limits, across the old sawmill tracks. It was the only church in Macomb with a steeple and bell, called First Purchase because it was paid for from the first earnings of freed slaves. Black folks worshipped in it on Sundays, and white men gambled in it on weekdays. What are you up to, Miss Cal? What you want, Lula? I want to know why you bringin' white chillin' to a black church. And Calpurnia says, "They's my company." I thought her voice strange. She spoke quietly, contemptuously. Lula says, "Yeah, and I reckon you's company at the Finch house during the week." Calpurnia says, "Don't you fret." Lula says, "Stop right there. They got their church, we got ourn. It is our church, ain't it, Miss Cal?" Calpurnia says, "It's the same God, ain't it?" "Let's go home, Cal. They don't want us here." "Now, Mr. Jem, we're mighty glad to have you all here. Don't pay no attention to Lula. She's a troublemaker from way back, got fancy ideas and haughty ways." Jem says, "We got our collection money, Cal. You keep it." Cal says, "Here's my company." "Cal, where are the hymn books?" She says, "We don't have any." Scout asks, "Well, how?" Shh. "Brethren and sisters, we are particularly glad to have company with us this morning. Mr. and Miss Finch, you all know their father. You all know of Brother Tom Robinson's trouble. He has been a faithful member of First Purchase since he was a boy. The collection taken up today and for the next 3 Sundays will go to Helen, his wife, to help her out at home." "That's the Tom Atticus is defending." "Shh." "Will the music superintendent lead us in the first hymn?" "We'll sing number 273. There's a land beyond the river." Then you can see they're singing the hymn. Lord, bless the sick and the suffering. The Reverend Sykes' sermon was a procedure no different from our church practice, a forthright denunciation of sin, a warning against the evils of heady brews, gambling, and strange women. Again, I was confronted with the impurity of women doctrine that seemed to preoccupy all clergymen. On closing his sermon, he stood beside a table in front of the pulpit and requested the morning offering. "This is not enough. We must have $10. You all know what it's for. Helen can't leave those children to work while Tom's in jail. Alec, shut the doors. Nobody leaves here till we have $10. I want all of you with no children to make a sacrifice and give one more dime apiece. Then we'll have it. Naw, Cal, we can put ours in. Give me your dime, Scout. All right, so now they're leaving, and the Reverend says, I can't speak. We were especially glad to have you all here. Scout asks, why were you all taking up collection for Tom Robinson's wife? The Reverend says, didn't you hear why? Helen's got 3 little uns, and she can't go out to work. Scout asks, why can't she take him with her, Reverend? He says, to tell you the truth, Miss Jean Louise, Helen's finding it hard to find work these days. Scout starts to ask why, and Jem interrupts her. We thank you for letting us come, Reverend. As they're walking away, Scout asks, as they're starting to walk home, Scout says, Cal, I know Tom Robinson's in jail and he's done something awful, but why won't folks hire Helen? Calpurnia says, it's because of what folks say Tom's done. Folks aren't anxious to have anything to do with any of his family. Scout asks, just what did he do, Cal? Cal says, old Mr. Bob Ewell accused him of raping his girl and had him arrested and put in jail. Scout says, Mr. Ewell, does he have anything to do with those Ewells that come... Mr. Ewell, does he have anything to do with those Ewells that come every first day of school and then go home? Why, Atticus said they were absolute trash. Yeah, those are the ones. What's rape, Cal? It's something you'll have to ask Mr. Finch about. You all hungry? The Reverend took a long time unwinding this morning. He's not usually so tedious. Jem says, he's just like our preacher. But why do you all sing hymns that way? Looks like they could save the collection money for a year and get some hymn books. Cal says, wouldn't do any good. They can't read. Jem says, can't read? All those folks? Cal says, that's right. Can't but about 4 folks in First Purchase read. I'm one of them. Jem asks, where'd you go to school, Cal? She says, nowhere. Let's see now. Who taught me my letters? It was Miss Maudie Atkinson's aunt, old Miss Buford. Jem says, are you that old? Cal says, I'm older than Mr. Finch. I'm older than Mr. Finch even. Not sure how much, though. We started remembering one time, trying to figure out how old I was. I can remember back just a few years more than he can. Jem asks, what's your birthday, Cal? She says, I just have it on Christmas. Jem says, but Cal, you don't look even near as old as Atticus. And Calpurnia says that colored folks don't show their ages so fast. Jem says, why did you teach Zebo to read? Jem says, Cal, did you teach Zebo to read? Cal says, yeah, Mr. Jem. I made him get a page of the Bible every day. Scout says, Cal, can I come see you sometimes? She says, see me, honey. You see me every day. Scout says, out to your house. Sometime after work, Atticus can get me. And Cal says, anytime you want to, we'd be glad to have you. All right, final section here. We're going to skip to page 158.